As we leave May and head deeper into summer weather, it's hard not to look back and realize just how many amazing releases this year left gathering dust in my backlog, as I forever wish for an endless supply of time to give them the attention they all surely deserve. Sadly though, one consequence of the sheer volume of great releases we've had in recent years is that the smaller, less marketed, more niche hidden gems become all but completely buried in search of an enthusiastic audience that just doesn't know they exist yet. This list is about spreading the word for those games you may or may not have heard of, but we really think you should consider experiencing. Maybe you'll also consider experiencing the joy and wonder of being a member of our Patreon. Supporting us will help our mission to bring you honest coverage of the latest and greatest, or sometimes not so greatest, indies, and give you cool perks like Discord community access, an exclusive podcast, free games depending on your membership tier, and much more. And don't forget to check out twitch.tv/idreamofindiegames, where you can find our very own gamer girlfriend usually streaming something awesome every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. Also, we want to hear from you. Are there any indies not on this list that you wish more gamers had experienced? Let us know in the comments below. My first pick is for anybody who, much like myself, has lamented for years at the lack of a 3D Sonic the Hedgehog game that's at least as good as Sonic Adventure 2 was back in 2001. Well, I suspected I would be waiting a long time until I played Spark the Electric Jester 3. Now, there's a reason I'm recommending the third game and not the first or second. Well, to be honest, I haven't played the first, which is a spiritual successor to 2D Sonic games, and I always preferred 3D Sonic to 2D Sonic, even though I know that's heresy to most, but I don't care. Come at me, bro. And I don't recommend the second for two reasons. One, because what I played of it felt more or less like a janky Sonic Adventure clone, and two, because the developers are so awesome that they added the second game's levels into the third one as a completely free DLC so that you can play the levels of the second game with the refinement and polish of the third, which is pretty damn cool, let's be honest. And refined and polished it certainly is. In many ways, Spark the Electric Jester 3 is so fantastically fast, fluid, and creative that it's hard not to see it as having surpassed its own inspirations. The camera is actually good, and not a spastic beast looking to get into a wrestling match with every wall it encounters. The levels are designed in a way that can be zipped through at lightning speed or carefully explored to find every hidden metal. Attacking enemies feels tight and responsive with controls that basically always work the way you intend them to and don't send you flying off a cliff to your death. You might as well call it Sonic Adventure 3 for how many boxes and necessary evolutions it checks, even if the story and its characters didn't especially grab me. But seriously, if you're an old school 3D Sonic fan, this one is worth immediately checking out. Next up on the list is a recent release that I myself have only had time to put a couple of hours into and am eagerly chomping at the bit for more. I'm talking about Cryptmaster, a dungeon crawler so filled to the brim with creative design that it made me completely forget how little I usually care about dungeon crawlers. While the tropes of the genre are mostly present and accounted for here as you venture with your party of 4 deep into a dungeon you can only traverse in discrete steps and 90-degree turns, the actual gameplay turns all expectations on their respective heads. Cryptmaster is a typing game and one fully committed to making your keyboard the only tool necessary to play it, so feel free to put that mouse aside. Progression in Cryptmaster comes in the form of unlocking a variety of attacks for your party members, and doing so by guessing the names of the attacks themselves. That's right, Cryptmaster arguably has more in common with Wordle than it does with most of its dungeon crawling ilk. Traversing through a dungeon allows you to fight enemies and open treasure chests, all of which allow for progression in the form of unlocking letters. When you open a treasure chest, the titular Cryptmaster will take out an item and require you to ask him a limited number of questions about it, with your only clues being his responses and knowing the number of letters the item contains. You can type anything to him and he'll attempt to respond appropriately. And I say attempt because the dev team has surely not anticipated all of the sweet naughty nothings some of you are sure to say, so keep your expectations in check. Guessing the item correctly will unlock all of the letters in its word and fill them in wherever they may fit in your party member's next guessable attacks. You can then guess those to unlock them at any time, but without enough letters already unlocked to fill them in, guessing can be a futile effort. Combat comes in the form of actually typing out the attacks and working around occasional limitations like an enemy having a shield that blocks any words that contain the letter B, for example. I don't want to spoil any other surprises the game has to offer, but needless to say, this is an endlessly clever title that has nowhere near enough attention on it. Next up is Boar Blasters, a satisfying roguelike about mining your way through rocks with your gyrocopter, or is it Eurocopter? Jester, I don't know, to collect tons of loot and turn yourself into an absolute menace of the underground. Meta progression comes in the form similar to Vampire Survivors, with tons of incremental upgrades to unlock that get progressively more expensive as you level up, but allowing you to feel tangibly more powerful every time you dig. Boar Blasters is a fairly simple game, but I had a bunch of fun on this one, and for its relatively inexpensive $10 price tag, you could find much worse ways to spend a couple of afternoons. I'm going to go ahead and call my next pick Flat Heroes, the single most underappreciated local multiplayer game I've ever experienced. It's a testament to the power of streamlined design and tight controls being all you need to make a great arcadey game, and in local multiplayer mode becomes absolute madness. While there are some competitive modes to choose from, Flat Heroes' strongest suit is its extensive and difficult campaign. You play as squares that can bounce around a single screen arena, avoiding or fighting all sorts of enemies and obstacles for just long enough to be able to pass the stage. What initially amounts to a fairly breezy set of levels quickly turns into a brutal fight for survival, as you're bouncing all over the place trying not to accidentally die from some aggressive lasers, exploding missiles, or very angry bosses. Flat Heroes' main appeal is some extremely clever level design, which shines when 2 or more players tackle its challenges at once, and frankly, I'd recommend having at least one other player join, as otherwise the difficulty could prove to be a bit excessive for some. But this is one of my favorite local multiplayer games ever, and without a doubt deserves a spot in the libraries of anyone who values some great couch co-op. Sticking with the theme for a moment, let's pivot to another local multiplayer title, albeit one that's strictly competitive and does have an online play option that was recently introduced. I'm talking about Unspottable, a super unique social stealth game that's been a staple of my living room game nights for a couple of years now. So what does social stealth mean? In the case of Unspottable, when each stage starts, you and all your fellow players are thrust into an arena where you and the numerous AI characters all look exactly the same. Your goal is to, first of all, figure out which one of them you are, and second of all, figure out who the other players are by observing the arena and seeing which of the characters appears to be acting a little funny, while ensuring you're not acting suspicious yourself. If you feel confident that one of the players is indeed your friend and not a bot, give them a punch and knock them out of the round, giving yourself a point in the process. But make sure you're actually confident they're not a bot, because in most of the arenas, bots don't punch, meaning you're going to draw a lot of attention to yourself by throwing fisticuffs, even if blending back in after doing so is usually not too tough depending on the level. Each stage has some sort of twist, whether it be a nightclub where all of you have to dance a certain way to avoid looking suspicious, a gym where everybody punches, including the bots, when the trainer counts down from 3, or a supermarket where sneakily collecting all the groceries on your list will allow you to leave the market with an extra point if nobody catches you in the process. It's all a tremendous amount of fun, and the number of hours I've gotten out of it easily exceeds the number of dollars it costs. I cannot any more highly recommend this one for those looking for some unique multiplayer fun. Next up is Path of the Midnight Sun, a super well-received turn-based RPG that, despite coming out almost a year and a half ago, only has about 150 reviews on Steam right now, despite having an 89 on OpenCritic. If that is not the quintessential definition of a hidden gem, I'm not really sure what is. Path of the Midnight Sun has some Fire Emblem inspiration, but mixes things up with the addition of aspects from visual novels and dating sims. It's a highly character-driven affair with key choices made throughout the game influencing the dating sim element and ultimately determining who ends up with who by the time the credits roll. And for those who are more into the dating sim and visual novel elements than the combat elements, there's thankfully a story mode difficulty that allows you to get into the game without stressing about the battles. If you're a fan of turn-based RPGs or story-focused games in general and haven't picked this one up, we highly recommend giving it a look. And now for something completely different. Can of Wormholes is a difficult puzzle game where you navigate a tin can with worm-like legs through a series of puzzle levels that will each introduce some kind of new mechanic or twist to keep you on your toes. All you have to do is guide the little worm you use in each level into a very specific configuration to complete it, but make no mistake, this is one of the more challenging puzzle games I've ever played, and it's going to require some serious out-of-the-box thinking to solve even some of its earlier puzzles. With that said, not only is its inclusion on this list a product of it being highly underexposed and pretty brilliant, but also because this game has the single best hint system I have ever seen in a puzzle game. Hints in Can of Wormholes don't come in the form of quick snippets of info that will tell you where to push something or what to ultimately do. They don't really spoil anything at all, actually. Rather, activating a hint will take you to a completely separate, much simpler form of the level you're currently in and allow you to play with the level's central mechanic in a simplified format. These hint levels are pretty easy, but exist to give you just enough information about a new mechanic to be able to see the overarching level from a new perspective. It is really brilliant stuff, and hard to ignore just how innovative innovative it is in a landscape of increasingly similar puzzle games popping up on Steam. Now, not every game needs to do something breathtakingly original to be worth a play, as properly executing on well-trodden ground can make a game really fun in and of itself. An example of this is Super Catboy, a retro 2D platformer with absolutely gorgeous pixel art that has you jumping, shooting, clawing, and bouncing through a large variety of bite-sized levels. Super Catboy isn't the most difficult game around, and it's not intended to be, but something about playing it just feels satisfying and fun, with an innate charm and beautiful variety of levels to pounce your way through that make it a great way to spend a couple of hours. Next up, what do you get when you cross Ratchet & Clank with Returnal and give it the sense of humor of a raunchy cartoon? Well, you get Bears in Space, a first-person shooter, bullet hell, platformer hybrid with such an absurd amount of silliness at its core that it's hard not to be a bit smitten. Bears in Space's sense of humor probably won't be for everyone, but if stumbling upon a side quest where you have to arbitrarily pick a suspected robot criminal out of a lineup with absolutely no information on what the criminal looks like, only for the detective to smash every robot in the lineup with a giant hydraulic press to ensure the criminal doesn't get away, sounds like a good time to you, Bears of Space will be right up your asshole. It can be surprisingly challenging at times too, with the sheer number of bullets you have to dodge being overwhelming at times. But similar to Ratchet & Clank, you get an enormous arsenal of weapons here, the sheer variety of which gives you plenty of ways to approach any given situation. Given its positive reviews, lengthy runtime, and reasonable price, it's kind of a wonder to me that more folks haven't picked this one up. I might be aging myself a little here with my last pick, but do you ever miss the old top-down Grand Theft Auto games where a huge part of the appeal was just running around, causing absolute chaos, and getting your wanted level up as high as unreasonably possible? Well, somebody went and made a roguelike out of that exact gameplay loop and is only charging $5 for the privilege. The game I speak of is Maniac, which allows you to run around its city as a drunken, slovenly Santa, an insane clown, or a variety of other wacky characters, running over pedestrians, shooting rockets at cop cars, and seeing just how high you can get that wanted level to and still survive. When you ultimately die, and you will, all your collected currency goes to a variety of meta upgrades, Vampire Survivor style, before jumping right back into another run. While I wouldn't say there's a ton of content here and the scenery can get a bit repetitive, what I can say is that the core gameplay model has a surprising lack of jank. It feels pretty tight to play, and the physicality of the driving model, explosions, and environmental interactions brings it close to the exact vibe of those older GTA titles than I'd even expected. For some, the exploitative, violent inclinations here may not have aged especially well, but I can't pretend I didn't have a really fun time with this one. And it runs great on the Steam Deck. If old school open world GTA is your jam, Maniac should probably be in your library. And that's all for now. There are tons of games out there we wish everyone had the time and budget to experience, but there is ironically not enough time to cover every single one. Hopefully this list gave you a look at some interesting titles you might have missed that still very much deserve to be played, and as always, keep it here on I Dream of Indie Games for honest opinions of as many great indie games as we can reasonably cover, and not just the massively popular ones.